Welcome to School's Out with Sam Sorbo, a series about education. What you don't know, what you should know, and what to do about it. Last week, we spent a good deal of time revamping our assumptions about curricula. This reassessment is entirely justified. After all, we all went to school where we were taught that learning happens inside an institution and that books divide knowledge into distinct areas with little to no overlap. But simply by recognizing the tremendous integration that exists in knowledge and understanding in various disciplines encourages us to rework our suppositions about curricula in general. This week, we will continue on the topic of curricula from the Latin word for course, as in race course. It is the collection of studies that embody the journey of education. Last week, we discussed math. This week, we'll begin with grammar, the building blocks of everything. I advocate starting with English grammar as early as first grade or even kindergarten. Oh no, you don't remember your grammar? No worries, as I've got some awesome news for you. There are fantastic books on English grammar that make it super easy, at least for the early years, and after that, you'll probably have gotten the hang of it enough to guide your students. Also, it's your chance to shine, to triumph. I loved the Shirley English Grammar program I used with my kids because it had jingles to sing about the different parts of speech, and it broke the grammar down to the small building blocks. A verb shows action, there's no doubt. It tells what the subject does, like sing or shout. And a sentence is complete when 5 simple rules, it meets. My young kids loved those. The practice part of the learning starts slowly with standard questions that encourage the student to think diagnostically. Sentence, dog barks. Question 1, what is being said about dogs? Dogs bark. Bark is the verb. Label it with a V. Question 2, what barks? Dogs, subject noun. Label it SN for subject noun. My son used to run to me in the mornings saying, I want to do some SNV now, Mommy. You know, the SNV stuff. Let's do that. Now, you may be wondering, why do little kids need to know this? Because they need to know everything, because everything, even English to them, is a foreign language. And if you show them that even English, which they are learning by immersion, right, is actually structured and ordered, they will understand better the order in the universe, and they will have less fear in their lives. When we perceive chaos, life becomes uncertain. Uncertainty ushers in fear. Look at your own fears and understand most of them stem from unknowns. Unknowns are typically the results of disorder. Children naturally seek security. Well, we all do. They have a lot of unknowns in their lives, and they need to learn about consistency and constancy. Add to that the fact that they know so very little, and you have a recipe for, well, a desire to learn. By teaching them about the order of things, something they are already curious to know, you show them that there is security in knowledge, and knowledge has order. Language isn't just a collection of random sounds formed in haphazard ways, linked together by accident. Language is deliberate and structured. That's a comforting thing for a child to understand. Oh, and another thing. Just because you've forgotten all the grammar you learned in grammar school, remember that term? Where did that one go? Yes, just because you've forgotten it all doesn't mean it didn't serve you then. And just because you hated to learn it, if you did, well, that speaks more about the method of teaching than it does about the subject matter. On another note, my children used to hate piano, scales. They really disliked them, but they wouldn't be able to play piano as beautifully if they hadn't practiced the scales. The scales are piano grammar. To express yourself effectively, you need to have a good understanding of the grammar and structure of language. Same thing with piano, actually. Showing your children these things is putting them on a path to discovery. And because it's a privilege to lead a child to knowledge, you get to participate with them. Children want to know things. Give them the things to know that will help them the most. English grammar is one of those fundamental things. Racist ideology is not, nor is LGBTQ plus information, nor are many of the things our schools focus on these days. Next on the curricula agenda, of course, reading. A friend just said to me that children spell love Time. Now that's perhaps more true than we are ready to admit these days. So, read to your kids, with your kids, and have them read to you. And read only the classics, please. What they've done to popular literature of today is shameful. There are classical book lists available online. Carve out time every day to read to and with your children. They will love you for it. Plus, then you'll have something to talk about in the car when you run your errands. Encourage and then demand that your children read a minimum amount of time each day as they grow older. Reading trains the eyes and the brain to imagine, sort, comprehend, envision, and grow. Reading unlocks the world. History is another subject that's been entirely perverted by our current school bureaucracy. Now, that's not to say there aren't wonderful history teachers out there, but as long as BLM, critical race theory, and the 1619 Project is entering our schools, there is very little hope left for history inside the system. Do you, like me, remember history being so boring it was mind-numbing? Was that the teaching of it or the subject matter? Because I absolutely adore history now. Teaching children history is fun and gratifying because it offers them a glimpse into how they too fit into the world. History is important. It's our story. And children love stories. Well, we all do. So branch out on your own. Get yourself some texts, perhaps those that predate the turn of the century, to start instructing your children. And by instructing, I mean exploring the stories with them. If you're like me, not a history buff, ease into it with the youngers. Get some historical novels and some good historical nonfiction. Learn about individuals, heroes who bucked the tide of history. You know a great place to start? The American Revolution, the Pilgrims on the Mayflower, and the Mayflower Compact. Find a copy and read it. Read about Jamestown. One thing I'm so grateful for is a trip I organized for my entire family where we toured the history of the nation in Virginia. We explored for a week in DC and then set out across that state. We saw the Smithsonian, the tremendous monuments of our founding fathers and our brave military that shine across the landscape of DC, the White House, and other government buildings, of course, and then went on to Mount Vernon, Williamsburg, Monticello, Jamestown, etc. History can come alive, and it's exciting. Now, there are so many videos and documentaries available online that shed light for young people to absorb parts of their history. Embrace that journey with your children, even if it's foreign to you. I promise you will come away a better person. Now, for the older children, David Barton's and Rick Green's Constitution Alive course is a great study on the founding of our nation and what makes it special. Should your children write about what they learn? Of course. Writing is translated as thinking. But Sam, I'm not a writer, so how can I critique my child's essays? Well, can you read? Is the child's essay saying something or nothing? Did you hear the story about Ben Carson, former candidate for the President of the United States and a preeminent neurosurgeon? His mother apparently couldn't read, but that didn't stop her from assigning him an essay a week on his library books. There are many books out there about how to write an essay. For writing creatively, I use the Institute for Excellence in Writing. I recommend also the Lost Tools of Writing for middle school and up to learn the persuasive essay. By the way, there is a standard outline for that. Did you know that? Did they teach you that in school? Because they should have. Or did they neglect that part of the fundamental education that should be happening in our schools? And if your point is that you can't teach it, so you'll put your child in school, that's just lame. It's just lame. If you don't know it, why would you expect your child to learn it where you didn't? Because the schools are better today than they used to be? Come on. Have your children research heroes and write about them. Give them stories, real stories, to fashion their hopes and dreams after. Give them something to aspire to. Geography is something that schools pretty much forgot about. Sure, you've got your unit lessons in social studies, but the schools combined what used to be the individual disciplines of history and geography, de-emphasizing the importance of both. So why do we need to learn geography? I mean, why bother, right? Ask yourself this. When you are in a new environment, how does it feel? You enter a building, don't have any idea where you are, never having been there before. Is it comfortable or unsettling? The analogy is that being aware of our surrounding, of where we are in the world, facilitates our comfort with who we are in this world. It also doesn't hurt if you ever get on Jeopardy. Geography isn't just the study of maps of the world, of countries, and their physical relationships to each other. Geography encompasses understanding the political relationships, the historical interactions, the effects of climate and terrain on the boundaries between nations, the power struggles, their joint histories. In short, geography is the study of the political world and our personal relationship to it. And knowing more about the world simply makes it less intimidating. Knowledge is power, as they say, and that's why we seek to educate our youth, right? Learning about other cultures also teaches us either the value of our own culture or its shortcomings. Studying these things is second only to traveling there. And if your children ever have the opportunity to travel, wouldn't you want to empower them to feel more comfortable? Learning about the world around us gives us perspective and solidifies our place in it. That's why we should be covering some geography with our young pupils. All right, let's talk about science. Start with exploratory biology. Send the kids outside to discover creepy crawly things and things that fly. plants, trees, and fungi. Collect leaves and preserve them by placing them between sheets of paper and pressing them under heavy books. And then discover, what are the different parts of a leaf or plant? Why do flat rocks skip across the surface of a pond? How does a bicycle work? There are now a ton of self-teaching kits for younger folks to learn about science. Some of them might be expensive, but there are also opportunities to see science videos online, to reproduce some experiments at home for little cost with your kids, and it's fun. Have you ever made a baking soda volcano? I remember as a child hanging out in the garden with my grandmother. She grew lots of vegetables, but the tomato plants were my favorites because they always had tomato worms. Tomato worms are large, puffy, bright green caterpillars that devour tomato plants and were a scourge to my grandma. I like to experiment with them. For instance, with a magnifying glass. Yes, and that's all I'll say about that. When my kids were young, I heard from a fellow homeschooler, self-teacher, that it was possible to grow these worms into moths and follow the life cycle of the creature. I bought a tomato plant, and through a convoluted story that I tell in my book, They're Your Kids, we fed our worm and watched him create a chrysalis and eventually emerge a big, beautiful brown moth. What a fantastic science experiment for the kids. And for me. Sure, there's a metric for standard knowledge. But in the younger grades, let up on the urge to check boxes when it comes to your child's learning experience. I mean, that is, unless they absolutely love to check boxes, in which case, give them some lists to accomplish. So start there, and then add. I quite enjoyed lyrical life science with my young kids. Again, it comes with fun songs styled after simple, well-known tunes to help learn about the scientific method, birds and bacteria, and all living things. And it just gets better from there. Go to a convention and look at materials. Try the library. There are websites and companies devoted to selling you science equipment and experiments. Ask others who have gone before. The idea with teaching science is to stoke the child's curiosity about the world around him and teach him methods of discovery, the scientific method that has recently, sadly, been entirely politicized. Also, life cycles, the water cycle, photosynthesis, cell theory, chemicals and chemical reactions, the fundamental rules of physics that we all live by. You can use a text for that, or you can allow the curiosity of the child to drive the exploration. Did you know that in our government schools, it's quite common for a class that uses a 52-chapter science book to cover only a third or less of the chapters? Okay, so let's move on to some of the things our schools ignore. First off, civics. In other words, what does it mean to be a good citizen? Well, we should all do our chores, right? We give our children chores not just to teach them responsibility, you know, but to make them better citizens and better friends. But the other lesson in giving children chores is to give them value. When they are responsible for performing because it serves the family unit, they intrinsically comprehend that they have worth. They have something to contribute, and not the fake self-worth derived from participation trophies. I remember when my oldest got a trophy on his t-ball team, literally for coming in last. The coach made some speech about how each child was so great and what a great team, etc., blah, blah, blah. But the kids all knew it was all so much blather. Playing games is about winning and losing, and learning how to do both with grace. Compensating the loser, it denigrates both the loser and the winner. Anyway, my son received his trophy, walked right over to the garbage can, broke it in two, and dumped it. And rightly so. It had no value to him, and he knew it. So why is it important that we learn civics? Because we the people, we are a self-governed people. Unlike most other countries in the world, our government only derives its power by the consent of the citizens. But for some strange reason, government schools are failing to instruct us that we retain the power. In fact, they do the opposite, convincing children to seek government intervention at every turn. If you don't feel competent to teach civics to your children, there's a reason for that. And there are also many resources available. Sure, start young. Read the documents and read our history in old books, please. It's just not that hard, and it's something, as an American adult, you should know. Latin is a great thing to undertake with your children, especially when they are young, and you can still appear to be expert, even though you might be totally out of your depth right at the word go. Get an introduction to Latin text and workbooks, or just print out some of the stuff available online. Have some fun with it. I taught my children a few prayers in Latin because they are parrots at that stage. And they loved showing off for people. Latin is great because there isn't really any correct pronunciation. So no one can laugh at you because we don't really know how it used to sound. But Latin is so much more than a dead language. In fact, it's very much alive, and we ought to still be teaching it. First, fully half of the English language derives from Latin. And it's the thinking half of our language, the big words. That's why medicine, science, and legal people are better off having a working knowledge of the language. Secondly, Latin is extremely structured and logical, much more so than English. It is the gateway language to learning foreign language. And remember, everything is a foreign language. And third, learning Latin is hard. So it teaches the student discipline. It teaches them they can do hard things. And by hard, we only mean complicated and demanding attention, concentration, and thought. It teaches perseverance and achievement. And remember what I've said before? Do not put your limitations or assumptions about education onto your children. The old adage, well, I never needed to know that and I turned out fine, is a poor excuse for giving up before even trying. Finally, I thought to mention that we ought to be teaching our children virtue, if only because our culture seems so dead set against it these days. To that end, I wrote my devotional for the school year, Teach from Love. It discusses 2 virtues each week in short stories with questions at the end of each day for discussion. Children learn by conversation. And frankly, that's also how we learn about our children. You can find a list of virtues online too, and just start tackling them one by one. It's fun, but warning, it may convict you a bit too. To sum up our position on curricula, a little story. A short while ago, I had a grandfather reach out to me to ask me if I could recommend a school curricula for his grandchild who would visit him on the weekends. He was playing too many games. Seriously, he thought schoolwork would be a good idea. There is not a better curriculum than grandma or grandpa. The child doesn't want to visit and get assignments and book work to do. I told him not to duplicate what happens inside the institution because from now on, school's out. And I suggested trying some projects together instead. Long story short, I recently got a photo of the two of them and the model car they built together. Next week, we will delve into more definitions. What is teaching? And what is a teacher? Thanks for joining me for this episode of School's Out with Sam Sorbo.